Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the National Press Club here in Washington, D.C., to those of you who are joining us in the room and the many of you who are following online. My name is Kate Gibson, and I'm an international criminal lawyer based in Geneva, and it's been my privilege to be leading the legal team of Paul Rusesabagina since he was illegally kidnapped and rendered back to Rwanda over 600 days ago. It would be remiss of me not to mention that we're speaking to you today at the Press Club on World Press Freedom Day. And as always, we are very grateful to our colleagues in the press, particularly those who are bravely covering this story, which we believe is one of the reasons that Paul Rusesabagina remains alive today. And it's worth noting that Reporters Without Borders, an organisation, has been publishing a World Press Freedom Index every year since 2002, which ranks the level of press freedom in each country. Out of 180 countries, Rwanda ranked 155 in 2020, slipping to 156 last year in 2021. Our legal team is made up of lawyers based in Switzerland, in Rwanda, in Brussels, in Canada, but about a year ago we received some serious reinforcements. Some of the most renowned and respected and impressive legal minds in the United States came together to produce a lawsuit that is the subject of today's press conference. Today is an opportunity for us to engage and discuss with them about this lawsuit, what it says and what it means and what it's likely to do. Before I hand over to Mr. John Eves Jr. to start these discussions, I just wanted to note that this lawsuit is one in a series of legal complaints that have been brought against the Rwandan government in response to Mr. Rusesabagina's kidnapping. Legal complaints have been filed in front of courts in Belgium, in front of the East African Court of Justice in Tanzania, and there is an ongoing complaint here in the United States against GainJet, which is the airline company that was used to illegally render Mr. Rusesabagina back to Rwanda. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention was also seized with a complaint and issued an opinion last month in which it confirmed that Paul's kidnapping was illegal, his detention is arbitrary, he should be immediately released, and the working group referred his conditions of detention to the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Torture. In relation to the trial itself, which is now concluded in Kigali, independent international trial monitors followed the proceedings. These monitors came from the American Bar Association and the Clooney Foundation for Justice, and they have issued a report saying the manifest violations of Paul's rights as an accused mean that the verdict itself shouldn't stand. So really a wealth of litigation that all has at its heart this idea that governments aren't allowed to do this. They're not allowed to deal with political opposition by kidnapping and torturing political opponents and activists or anyone who says something unfavourable to the regime. To talk more about this, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. John Eves Jr. from the Eves Law Firm. This law firm, founded in 1963 in Jackson, Mississippi, has represented over 20,000 clients from across continental United States, its territories, and 11 foreign countries. Mr. Eves has been successful in collecting over $2 billion for clients who themselves have been the victims of state-sponsored terrorism, cybersecurity breaches, environmental contamination, and maritime and aviation disasters. Mr. Eves has litigated claims against Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Afghani terrorist organizations, corporate giants, and pharmaceutical corporations. He's advocated for justice before the courts and Congress and lectured throughout Europe on the American legal system. His desire to serve the disadvantaged is what fuels his philanthropic nature, which is evident by the types of cases he pursues. And I'm very pleased to hand the floor to him now to talk about the lawsuit filed on behalf of Mr. Rusesabagina and his family.
Thank you, Kate. That is very, very generous. Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is John Arthur Eves, and I am truly honored to be a part of America's legal team that's working for Paul Rusesabagina. I want to thank you for coming today in this very important case that involves national security, justice, and freedom of speech. Because every day Americans watch the forces of democracy struggle against authoritarianism around the world. But in this case of Paul, the fight is alive and well right here on American soil. Because this case will be the first case where a foreign nation has kidnapped on American soil. And this case means not just compensation for the families, telling the truth, but it is also important for every American that we send a firm message to any nation that would kidnap someone on American soil. So first, let me just introduce Paul's families present today, because they have endured so much. They have endured so much more than the rest of us will ever have to endure. Paul's wife, Tatiana, thank you. His daughter, Anais. His daughter, Corrine, beside me. And his son, Roger. Now, most of us were first introduced to Paul in 2004 when his incredible story of courage and compassion during the Rwandan genocide was told in the critically acclaimed film Hotel Rwanda, and his subsequent autobiography, An Ordinary Man. During the genocide, Paul used the power of his words alone to save more than 1,200 men and women and children from machetes and machine guns. His heroic actions inspired me then and inspire me now and millions of others, because it is a testimony to what your voice can achieve. He was awarded the Medal of Freedom in 2005, the United States' highest civilian honor. His example of determination and obligation and the moral duty to confront evil shines through his children now and his wife, because they are the ones who have picked up the torch, trying to save the life of the man who saved theirs in that tragedy 25 years ago. Like so many who came before him, Paul came to the United States in a flight from political persecution. First, he went to Belgium from Rwanda. He sought refuge there, but that was not safe. And eventually he came home to the United States, to the great state of Texas, San Antonio, Texas. He sent his children to American universities, and he expected to live out his life in safety and in peace. He believed the U.S. afforded him the greatest protection for his family, so he could continue his work as an activist promoting peace and reconciliation without any fear of retaliation from any dictator. He has been a tireless advocate of human rights and a founding member of the Hotel Rwanda Rusesabagina Foundation that supports victims and survivors to this day. And for years, the Rwandan government has sought to discredit, to smear, and to silence Paul, and to retaliate against him for his criticisms of the government. And because of this criticism and his advocacy for human rights, Paul Kagame and his comrades have stalked, they have harassed, they have slandered, and they have attempted to assassinate Paul on 3 occasions. Now they have accomplished a kidnapping They have tortured him. They have falsely painted him as a terrorist. And I ask you the question, why is such an ordinary man such a threat to Kagame's regime? The lawsuit that we formally announced today tells the story of how the Rwandan government stalked Paul on American soil, lured him out of his home in San Antonio, Texas, by trickery. Paul left his home thinking his escort was a bishop of the church, a man of God, but little did Paul know that the charlatan was an agent of the same group who sought to silence him and his message. Paul was tracked by special agents of the Rwandan government. He's kidnapped, and now in Rwandan custody, he has been harassed, drugged, tortured, deprived of medical needs and basic human rights. These atrocities have been chronicled in our complaint. The sham trial that led to his arbitrary detention has been condemned in a report issued by the American Bar Association Center for Human Rights as part of the Clooney Foundation for Justice's Trial Watch initiative. And the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has called for his immediate release. Belgium's foreign minister, several prominent human rights organizations, and the U.S. State Department have all called the trial into question. This trial is a prime example of the subversion of due process and transnational repression. But now that the Rwanda regime has Paul, it thinks it can be silenced. But a torch once lit cannot be extinguished, and today we all speak for Paul. Paul's family has suffered greatly at the hands of this government. Tatiana has had to watch and wait while her husband was kidnapped by the very dictator who threatened him for over 20 years. She's had to listen to false charges designed to destroy his reputation and the principles upon which he has dedicated his life, working for peace and human rights. She's admitted to me that she cannot sleep at night. She has nightmares, and this is every day. Her daughter, Corrine, has told me that she's been threatened with being cut with a golden machete, had her telephone hacked with Pegasus spyware. She's been accused of genocide denial. And the other members of his families have had their college classes viewed by members of the Rwandan government. The entire family, each one of them, each soul, has had to deal with the emotional trauma of knowing that the man they love is being mentally and physically tortured, that he's been denied the medical treatment he needs, given his past needs for cancer medication and the known strokes that he's had in the last months. But I tell you this, perhaps the worst terrorist act has been that the family has had to endure not knowing each day what's happening with Paul. Not knowing if he's alive, not knowing if he's being subject to torture. No one is able to rest. Everyone is constantly on guard to what lies will be told or what threats they will receive. This intimidation knows no bounds. Why does a government that already has Paul captive, has him sentenced to 25 years, why do they need to continually harass and do these things against his family? Today, Paul is not the only hero that we celebrate, but today I celebrate his family as heroes as well. Rather than live in fear, rather than shrink back and hide, they have decided to follow their father's example, to stand and fight this evil. They refuse to be bullied, and I am honored to be a part of the team that stands with them, and they have inspired me to take action. Now, we cannot control how this regime will treat Paul during his captivity from now on out. We can't control that. But what we can do is make sure that the truth is told, that the American justice system shines a bright light to bring the truth out, and to make sure that members of Congress know the true nature of the Rwanda regime. They will not be able to hide in the U.S. court system. I want you to know, family, that you're not alone in this fight, that we all stand with you. And we will not stand by as the democratic values and human rights are attacked by a tyrant. We cannot ignore as Americans an act of foreign espionage conducted on American soil against a legal permanent resident of the United States. And I'm honored to be just one of this legal team. Today we also have the Perlis Law Firm. Steve Perlis, sitting in the back of the room there, also joined by Emily Amick. This law firm has joined with us. They have been engaged in private civil litigation against state-sponsored terrorism for over 30 years. They've filed claims against Iran, Syria, Sudan, and Libya for thousands of terror victims. They have been successful in taking on private institutions that have laundered money for terrorist organizations. And their firm's work has resulted in billions, not millions of dollars, in reparations for American victims of terrorism. Sitting beside me is Agnieszka Frischman. She's chair of Cohen Milstein's human rights practice. She is internationally acclaimed expert and leader in the field of human rights law. She represents individuals who have been victims of torture, human trafficking, forced and slave labor, and other violations of international law. She regularly litigates human rights violations against corporate giants like Chiquita, Exxon, and KBR. And she's most famous for being a member of the legal team that successfully represented survivors of Nazi-era forced and slave labor against the German and Austrian companies that profited from their labor, and these have also resulted in multi-billion-dollar settlements. It is an honor to be here. Emily, who I mentioned earlier as part of the Perlis Law Firm, is the senior policy counsel at the Perlis Law Firm. She formerly served as counsel to Senator Majority Chuck Schumer and has helped write and inform him on a lot of the laws dealing with terrorists, holding terrorists accountable in the U.S. legal system. Now, this team has dedicated their lives to helping people rebuild their lives who've suffered for similar atrocities. And collectively, they have over 100 years of joint legal practice. This is a good team. If you wanted to create the dream team for this situation, this is them. And I want to assure you that the American justice system is strong enough to stand up to the current Rwandan government. This American judiciary has always been protectors of citizens' freedoms. And every single day that Paul suffers, the Rwandan government will pay damages, will pay more every day that he suffers. They will pay in dollars, and they will pay as reputation. President Kagame may have full control of the courts and the press in Rwanda, but when he directed acts in the United States, he made a serious mistake. The American judicial system has dealt with bullies and tyrants before. And just like they say in Paul's home state, don't mess with Texas, I'm here to tell you, don't mess with the U.S. justice system. America will not allow any dictator to commit crimes of kidnapping on U.S. soil and escape responsibility. This system has protected free speech and democracy among much more dangerous peoples than Kagame. Now, as this case moves along, we'll move into the discovery process. It is the next phase, and this is where the battlefield is. This is where the truth will come out and be revealed. And I will assure you that all of Rwanda will know that the truth about Paul when this case is over. They will know who has been deceiving them and who has been telling them the truth. This system is a powerful force in setting the record straight. We will demonstrate to the Rwandan people what a fair justice system looks like. And each stage of this case, we will shine and bring forth that truth. We will demonstrate to the world that what Paul has been telling us all along about the current Rwanda regime, its anti-democratic government. And we can rest assured, because we all know that the history books are filled with stories of temporary stability gathered through fear by dictators, but lasting peace only comes with democratic freedoms. We will show this through example, and how one ordinary man can illustrate the wrongs while showing us the right paths. Without the guarantee that we may speak, think, protest without fear, we are at risk of losing everything we in the Western world take for granted. We are at risk of losing the moral framework that has allowed us to hang the shingles of a civilized society, to erect the walls that protect us from powerful and evil men, that allow us to place a window through which we may glimpse a brighter future and open the door of democracy to the world. Today, we stand with Paul and his family, and for the ideals which we have built in this great home that we all call America. Thank you. Would you say something, Agnes?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. My name is Agnieszka Frischman, and I'm honored to join the legal team here today. I was astounded to learn the facts of this case, and I think most Americans would be astounded to learn that someone, in this case a private citizen and human rights icon, could be lured from their home in the United States, in Texas, lured to a foreign country, kidnapped, and put on a show trial by a vindictive dictator. This type of malfeasance that violates international law cannot be tolerated by countries that value the rule of law and ought to be condemned by all civilized nations. These allegations are deeply troubling, and they're made even more so and more urgent by Paul's fragile health and by the reports of the severe and illegal torture that he suffered while detained in Rwanda. I'm honored to assist Paul Rusesabagina's family here and to join in this lawsuit with Mr. Eves, and I look forward to prevailing in court. Thank you.
Okay. Doreen?
Thank you. For the past 613 days, our family has been doing everything possible to save our father's life. We have suffered. Our father has suffered. And every single day, we are afraid to receive a call that our father has taken his last breath. We have tried everything to follow in his footsteps, to follow his example, and to stand up for what is right. Our father is a humanitarian, and he has always stood up for the vulnerable. We look forward to our father's name being cleared in an American court, where we have the best justice system in the world. Thank you.
I'm going to go first. We have a couple questions that have come in from the web. And John, the first question, if you want to answer, direct it to one of the other lawyers. Can you explain a little bit more about the facts of the case, what's in the lawsuit, and why is the lawsuit being pursued in the United States?
Sure. Well, the kidnapping occurred on U.S. soil. It was a violation of U.S. sovereignty for this to have occurred. And we believe that the American court system is the only court system that can truly render a fair and impartial decision as to the truth of these allegations. As you know, that Paul was in a sham trial in Rwanda that has been criticized universally by the outside world as to its fairness and its upholding to the human rights protocol. The American court system will reveal that truth, and every American has an interest in this case because we cannot allow anyone to be kidnapped on U.S. soil by any foreign nation.
And is Paul an American citizen?
No, Paul is a permanent legal resident of the United States, his children. He has children that are American citizens, but that should not be a distinguishing factor. Anyone who seeks asylum in the United States should be under the safety and security of the American system.
And isn't it true that Paul's a Belgian citizen and a U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom winner? And if you could maybe say that for the...
Yes. Paul is a Belgian national, but he is also a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom awarded to him by President Bush in 2004.
And has there ever been another U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom winner kidnapped by a foreign government on U.S. soil?
Never. There's never been a Presidential Medal of Honor winner kidnapped on U.S. soil. There has never been a kidnapping on U.S. soil by a foreign national government.
The next question has to do with the logistics of the lawsuit. What happens next in the lawsuit? What happens if Rwanda doesn't respond? If you could talk a little bit about that.
I'd like to give that to Emily.
Rwanda has until May 8th to reply to our complaint. If they choose not to participate, the case moves forward without them. We think, based on the strong evidence that we can put forward, the judge will grant the Rusesabagina family a large default judgment against Rwanda, and we have collected many times against foreign sovereigns.
And we're going to go to some questions from in the room, and just for the videotape, if you can sort of repeat the question before you answer it.
Yes, question for the legal team. This is a civil case. First of all, in your discovery or in your investigation, is there any evidence that would dictate a possible criminal complaint? And should the U.S. Department of Justice investigate this as a criminal action?
I think I'm going to refer this to you. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you very much. Certainly, the underlying conduct of what has happened to Paul rises to the level of torture. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention looked at the conduct of Paul's detention and this critical 4-day period in which he was disappeared. He was kidnapped on the 27th of August, and no one saw him again until the 30th, when he was paraded in front of the Rwandan press. When the details of what happened to him in those interim 4 days was presented to the UN, they decided to refer that conduct to the UN Special Rapporteur for Torture. So it's likely that that conduct, and certainly in our view, that conduct rises to the level of criminal activity against him. The lawsuit that's been filed in the US is, as you say, a civil lawsuit and limited to that. The many other legal options that we're pursuing in other jurisdictions also haven't been criminal to this point, but it's certainly something that we as a legal team has discussed, and it remains in the back of everyone's minds, because I think that's sort of the most difficult aspect of the case for all of us. Yes, his rights as an accused have been violated. Yes, he's been separated from his family, but we also know that he's been subjected to this physical abuse. We talked briefly about Paul's health, and I think that's worth emphasising again here. He's a 67-year-old with a pre-existing heart condition, and one of the really sinister aspects of what the Rwandan government has done is that right after his arrest, the Belgian government shipped to the Rwandan authorities in a diplomatic case the medication that he needs in order to regulate his heart condition. That's been they've refused repeatedly to give him the medication, and so we know now in the course of the last few weeks he's suffered a series of strokes. So we're talking now about a permanent impact on the remainder of the quality of the remainder of his life. Things couldn't be any more serious, and this is why this lawsuit is now extremely important and timely, and I would say urgent. lawyers often give a really long answer if they haven't got straight to it. But I hope I have answered the question that you asked, which was a very good one.
Kate, I have another question about the lawsuit specifically. Why are you suing Rwanda, and why do you think they're behind Paul's kidnapping? Do you have any proof?
One of the reasons that this lawsuit has such a strong basis is that there's not really any dispute about what happened here. The Rwandan Attorney General and Minister of Justice at the time of Paul's kidnapping, Mr. Johnson Businye, came out on television on Al Jazeera and said, we were behind this kidnapping, we paid for the plane. We have a receipt from Gainjet, the aviation company, made out to the office of the President of the Republic of Rwanda for 120,000 euros, showing the Rwandan government paying for the flight that was used in the kidnapping. It's been celebrated by the Rwandan president himself. He called it a flawless operation, the ability to kidnap Paul from American territory. So, you know, as Emily said, the Rwandans have until the 8th of May to respond. It would be very difficult for them to deny the underlying conduct that makes up the basis of this suit.
Are there any other questions in the room? Okay, we have one more question from the web, and then I'm just gonna go check with Facebook Live to see if there's any questions from there. John, I think you can take this and the other lawyers can chime in, but is this lawsuit symbolic? Do you really hope to go anywhere with this lawsuit?
Absolutely. This is a credible legal team. They don't take frivolous lawsuits. This case is well documented. There's been a lot of investment in this case. And this case is serious. Our objective is to reveal the truth about Paul, about what he's been saying about the regime, but also to compensate this family. They've become obvious that the regime is not going to release Paul. So this family has got to pick up his torch, pick up his mission, but they also have to stand for redeeming his name in the American court system, and they also have to be compensated for this great suffering that they go through every day, that they continue to go through until we find the justice. Every day that goes by, the amount of this compensation will go up, and Rwanda will have to pay it.
And we have one last question, a little bit off topic from the lawsuit, but Corinne, your father is a Belgian citizen. What's been going on in Belgium with respect to your father?
So the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs also called the trial a sham. She called into question the verdict because of all of our father's rights who were violated. The Belgian Parliament also adopted a resolution asking for our father to be released and returned. And we know that many people around Belgium are also raising their voices and calling on Rwanda to respect the rule of law, to respect human rights, and to stop violating all established legal standards that we all live by.
Is it normal for Rwanda to kidnap Belgian citizens?
Rwanda has done a lot of things on Belgian soil as well, and that is why our family was no longer safe in Belgium. We have been followed in Belgium, we have been harassed, our home has been broken into. As you know, my phone was also infected with Pegasus, and that is a huge violation of my privacy. I don't feel safe going many places now, knowing that the Rwandan government can track me wherever I go, just because I stood up with my family for our father's rights. So we know what this government does, and we are thankful and grateful for this incredible team for bringing it in front of the American justice.
We have one more question from the audience.
Question, Corinne, to you is, again, as stated before, this is the first time that a Presidential Medal of Freedom holder, as well as a U.S. permanent resident here in the country, has been literally kidnapped off of U.S. soil. Have you been contacted, or have you had discussions with Secretary Blinken or the Biden administration, and what has the Biden administration, Secretary Blinken, and the State Department done to either facilitate, because from our standpoint, we have not seen a lot of action out of Bogdan Bar?
So our father's case has been taken under the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, the SPIHA office. And we were grateful to have a call with Secretary Blinken last year with other families of hostages and wrongful detainees. And he assured us that they will do everything possible to bring our father home to the United States. We are grateful for the State Department support, and we encourage the government, the United States, to continue to put pressure on the Rwandan government for our father's life.
And I have one last question, and then if the legal team wants to make any last remarks, but what exactly is the lawsuit hoping to accomplish? What is the $400 million? Could you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish with the lawsuit?
Sure. Well, as an American myself, we cannot allow foreign national governments to come onto U.S. soil and kidnap anyone. Secondly, and probably more importantly, this family deserves compensation for the suffering that they have had in this case. And thirdly, is that it is important to use this lawsuit as a tool to continue Paul's message and mission of exposing this regime's atrocities and violations of human rights to all Rwandans. And I think that Rwandans will eventually, through the American legal process, will understand who is really telling them the truth in Rwanda.
And we've talked about kidnapping. Can you just explain, Kate, some people have said he was lured, not kidnapped. Can you just explain a little bit about why we know that he was kidnapped?
What happened to Paul falls squarely within the legal definition of kidnapping. Interestingly, we saw today the Rwandan government spokesperson coming out and saying that this lawsuit is frivolous and baseless, and that Paul was not kidnapped, and he came to Rwanda of his own volition, and he was arrested pursuant to a pending arrest warrant. This just isn't true. There is not and has never been an arrest warrant issued against Paul Rusesabagina, nor has it ever been produced either to him or his lawyers or in support of this claim that has been repeated by the Rwandan government that his arrest was lawful. He was kidnapped. He was brought against his will on a plane in which he was drugged and tied up at the mouth, hands, and feet. There isn't any sensible legal challenge to the fact that Paul was kidnapped, and the Rwandan government again today repeating that it was lawful and pursuant to arrest warrant just really highlights for us the strength of our claim and the weakness of any counter-argument.
Any last remarks? Any last questions? One more question and then we're really done. What advice would you give to President Kagame's supporters and friends in governments around the world, in the House and Senate, here in the UK? What advice would you give to President Kagame's friends to give to him?
Well, let me just say, as a lawyer, I'm prohibited from advising the other side. But I can tell you this, that this family has endured much, and this case is a good, solid case, and that every day that goes by that Paul is sitting in that prison is additional money and reputation that Kagame will suffer from. And we have had a long history in the world of tyrants that have risen, have controlled people by fear and intimidation, and they are no longer with us. The only system that works is our democratic system.
Thank you.
What other outreach have you done to make Americans in Rwanda aware of this? I mean, I wouldn't have known if it wasn't for Kitty, that this was happening.
Green, I think I'm gonna let you answer that.
We have a lot of resolutions have been adopted around the world. We also have recently launched, with the help of Don Cheadle and the Hotel Rwanda family, a T-shirt campaign to raise awareness on our father's illegal detention in Rwanda. We have had several conversations with many organizations that have also published reports, such as the American Bar Association, the Clooney Foundation for Justice. As you know, in Europe, the European Parliament has also adopted a resolution in Belgium, similarly. In the United Kingdom, the Westminster Hall, the members of Parliament called on Magnitsky sanctions on Rwandan government officials. So many people around the world are talking about it, and we hope that continuing to, our father used to always say that the best way to keep a political prisoner alive is to keep speaking about him. And we are doing our very best to make sure that his name continues to be said, and that we continue to speak about him and to keep him alive.
And Crane, sorry, this really is the last, but could you talk a little bit about the Magnitsky sanctions that the Lantos Foundation has asked to bring in the U.S.?
The Lantos Foundation has proposed the Magnitsky sanctions on the government officials responsible for the kidnapping of our father. And we hope that the Congress will bring this forward and help us put enough pressure on the Rwandan government to release our father.
Thank you.